Hi there, this is Shauna from the Foil Fox. I'm so glad you're here today. I am going to be making 3 cards using the same stamp set, so 3 different looks. So let's jump in. I'm using a floral stamp by Conquer Knife called Blended Petals. It has some sentiments plus that wonderful floral display. It has a matching die set here. Then I'm going to also be using some butterflies. These are from the Soaring die set from Penny Black. It also has where you can cut out the circles. Won't be using those today. A Conquer Knife plaid turnabout. You can turn it 1 to 4 times, which I think those are marvelous. And then this is an oldie but goodie. This is Brushed Blossoms. You can also use fine line florals. I'll put both of them in there. They have what they call, I call intentional ink splatters. I love using them. Now I'm using some watercolor paper. These are all A2 size and A2 white card panel, and then a 5.5 square panel. That's for the turnabout. A2 craft paper and A2 card bases. I'm going to be using a few of these, of course, because I've got to make 3 cards, and I have some diagonal paper. This happens to be from My Favorite Things. Now I'm using a stamp press here that I have mounted this floral stamp onto. Now you can use a stamp positioner like a Misty if you would like, and I do use it later on, but for this, for my first card, I like using this stamp press. I saw Dawn from W+9 did this. I thought it was brilliant, and I had to try it myself and show you myself my own discoveries about it. I'm using saltwater taffy, festive berry, and a little bit of the wild honey and evergreen bough on the leaves. It looks like I'm just putting it all over everywhere, but I'm really not. I'm kind of using the corner of my ink pad to kind of get into the smaller areas, but I don't need to be very precise. I spritzed it 3 or 4 times, getting it very nice and juicy. And I'm going to move this around, and this is when a stamp press like this is fabulous. I can stamp it twice really quickly and get 2 impressions before I have to re-ink it again. And that is very helpful when you wanted to move it around very quickly. You don't have to peel it off the door and reposition it. And in fact, if you do use a stamp positioner, what I would suggest that you do is that you ink one flower and then you color it in, like you're going to see me do with all of this, just that one part, and get it all exactly the way you want it in case you want to restamp it to get a crisper image, and then make sure it's dry, then move it instead of moving it around like this. I move this around very quickly because you can just take a damp brush like this and urge, because you have so much, it's so juicy on there, that you can urge that ink away from the edges and then color this whole thing. If you need a little extra, I just smush a little bit onto my work surface and then use just tiny bits of that ink to augment it. I like how some areas where there's more festive berry are a little bit darker, and it kind of decides for you depending upon how you stamp it. You don't have to be real precise about it. That's the other reason why I love it. But I love a kind of a loose watercolor look. So this one is right up my alley. And I'm just touching these areas and bringing that ink out. And then I have the leaves that I'm going to just moisten here. They are, because it's starting to dry, I'm going to put a little bit of extra ink in there. So all 3 of these cards use the same ink colors. And just to show you, you can of course change them around. And you can use whatever color combination you happen to like. I love this combination. It turns out to be a really lovely one. But I have used it with abandoned coral and wild honey as well. There's just, whatever your heart desires, you can really make this work for you. And now that once I get this all done the way I like it, I'm going to just splatter on a little bit of the wild honey and some festive berry. Just make some ink splatters there. And I'm going to set that aside to dry. While that's drying, I'm going to ink this up again. I have another watercolor panel. I'm going to ink it up exactly the same way with exactly the same inks. And I'm going to spritz it really, really well, like I did before. See how that's nice and juicy? And I'm just going to move those out of the way and get one impression. Now again, this is where you could use a stamp positioner if you want, but I already had it mounted on this stamp press, and it's very easy. That's all I'm going to do here for the stamping, because I'm going to color this in exactly the same way, and then we'll cut it out using the matching die set. And the die set fits perfectly. I love that when they're very well made and measured very nicely, and it cuts it out beautifully. Now I don't go all the way to the edges with this. I like having a little bit of the white space showing, and you can see it's just this fast to doing this. It's just a really fast technique to give you a loose watercolor, very gentle kind of look to it. Now that it was very, very, very dry, you didn't see me dry it, but I did dry it. You can dry it with a heat tool, or you can wait it naturally dry. I did cut out that blossom. Now I'm using some glue on the back of this. I always smear it onto the edges because I want it to go all the way to the edges so that it sticks down. The edges are so important so they don't lift up and make your card look less tidy. Now with some foam tape on the back of my flower, I'm just going to position that. And I happen to love a lot of flowers like this, and to give it a little extra interest, I'm going to use some butterflies that I cut out. Little white butterflies are just cut out of white cardstock. I also am going to do a sentiment. They have this wonderful sentiment strip and some sentiments. So I stamped it with festive berry, put it on that sentiment strip, and I think it works out perfectly. I'm going to use some glue dots here for my butterflies because I can kind of roll them and they give it a tiny bit of dimension, and they fit right on the center of a butterfly and still leave the wings free, and I really like that. So I often use a glue dot for that, and since I have them out, I might as well use it for my sentiment as well. Just putting a few glue dots on there, and I'm going to stick this down. Now I have some creamsicle pearls. These are from Pretty Pink Posh. And I'm going to just take a spot of glue on my butterflies, and I'm going to add a little pearl for each one of these. I toyed with putting some more pearls on here, but I decided just to stick with these, just to give it just enough. And so this card is done. I'm going to set that aside. We're going to revisit it later. I'm going to zip on to the next one. This is where I'm using the 5.5-inch square. I'm going to be trimming this panel down, but it's so much easier on this turnabout. So if you haven't used them, to start out with a square and stamp the whole thing, because then you can center it exactly onto the stamp, and then ink it up. You can see I also have that Just Because stamp there. I'm just ignoring that for right now. We're going to use that in just a minute. I'm using antique linen here, and I'm just going to ink this up, and then I'm going to rotate it once. I'm going to rotate it to the right, so count clockwise, and make sure if you rotate this more times that you go the same direction. You always stay clockwise or always stay counterclockwise. I'm using a very, very pale pink, and the palest pink I could find was Sweet Blush, but you can use any kind of color that you like. Again, any color combination you like. I just happen to really like this one. I'm going to ink this up really well. I'm only going to turn this one time, but you can continue to turn it to have it fill out that sheet. But now I'm going to take a piece of white cardstock, mount it where my sentiment is. I've just got tape runner on the back of these that's repositionable so that I can peel them up, and I don't have to use magnets for them. They just keep it down onto my surface there. I wanted an ombre look, so I'm using some antique linen, saltwater taffy, and festive berry, and just inking it up in a more ombre way. So dark on the bottom, the saltwater taffy in the center, and then the antique linen. And now I'm going to ink one more of these. I still have it on my press. One more of these, this floral display, inking them the exact same way, spritzing them. You saw me just really spritz that. And I'm going to, this is watercolor paper again. And I'm going to go and repeat the process of just zipping around this with a damp brush. You can see I have water off to the side there. Use a little bit of the festive berry if I want it to be a little darker in some areas to add a little bit of drama. And then I will color the leaves as well. With a little bit more of the evergreen bough. And now I let that dry really well. I cut it out. I'm going to cut out my sentiment that I made. But I have my card base, which is an A2. Then I have my craft paper that fits right on the card front completely. And then I'm going to glue it down. You saw that I got some water on the one side of that paper, and this is a perfect time for me to use it because most of it's going to be covered up and I don't have to worry about it, and it's a good way to use paper. I love to conserve paper. Now with this plaid, I just trimmed it back just a little bit so that craft edge shows, and then I have some foam tape on my flowers, have those mounted, decide which way I want to put it, and then I end up putting it in the same place, I think. And then the same thing, I have a little bit of tape runner on there, and that stuck that one down. And that finished that card. That was quick. You didn't get a chance to see much of it, but we'll see more of it in just a few minutes. And then we're going to continue on. This is with a watercolor panel using the same 3 colors, and I'm just using my brush it's pretty wet, and I want it to be pretty loose. I'm doing a loose kind of stripe down the left side, but I want it to be quite loose. I don't want any where it's super hard edges to it. I'm going to blot that off. And then as soon as I kind of got that all the way I wanted to, I'm going to dry it really, really well. Put it back in my stamp positioner. And I'm going to stamp this. Again, this is where this is very handy because I'm using VersaFine Black Onyx ink here. You know that this is a waterproof ink. You know I love it because it's very crisp. It's waterproof. It just gives a really nice impression. I'm going to stamp this. Now, I just kind of kiss the paper. I don't want to get too rambunctious with it. I'd rather re-ink it than to push really, really hard because I don't want it to kind of mush in areas and kind of smear some of the detail to this. So I'm just kind of kissing it with it and getting a really good impression. Now I'm using my intentional Splatters stamp here. This one is where I can splatter it could just splatter it, but I'd rather that put them in particular areas and have them be a particular size. And that's where a stamp like this really comes in super handy. And I always keep it at the ready. And now I have that done. I'm going to take some of my a strip. This is a 1-inch strip of the diagonal paper. Put it onto an A2 card panel, not on the base yet, just on the card panel, and you'll see why. Now I'm having a heck of a time getting the last bit of glue out of this, but I'll squeeze it out. Make sure it goes all the centers. Now I've trimmed this back a little bit so that this diagonal paper will show, plus a tiny little edges on the other 3, more where the diagonal is. So I've just trimmed it back just a little bit, whatever suits you. And then I did the cardinals, and I had forgotten that I used VersaFine black ink, and that any of these waterproof inks have a long open time, and I touched the ink and then touched my paper, smeared it a little bit, so I used my sand eraser and all's good, thank heavens. So now I have a piece of black cardstock using one of the sentiments, hello. I'm going to ink it with Versamark ink, which is an invisible sticky ink, so that I can stamp it and then sprinkle it with my white embossing powder. Flick off all the areas that I don't want, and then I'm going to heat set it, and then once this is all heat set, I'm going to trim it into a strip, and then cut off the little corners to make a little tag out of it, and then punch a hole, so I have this little tag that's going to be dangling down. Punch a tiny hole, and then we're going to be good to go here. First we take some baker's twine. This is black and white. Going to zip it around a few times. Make sure that I've got it. Going to tie a knot first once I make sure that it's in the right position. So I'm going to kind of hold my tag there and say, yeah, I think that's good. So I'm going to tie this knot. And then I'm going to thread this twine through. Now I struggled with getting it through there, the hole, so I had to get a needle and thread. But instead of having you see me struggle through it, I'm going to just do this off camera, get that through, and then tie a little bow. And I'm using double stick tape here because you know I was running out of ink, glue, but you can use either one. And I'm going to stick this down, and then my card is going to be done. That's all done, and I'm going to just show you some close-ups here. This is the one we just finished with the stripes. I really like this one. In fact, I'm hard pressed to know which one I like the most. You will have to let me know which one that you like the most. This one has a little bit more modern look to it, and it's very simple but very, very striking, I think. And then we're going to move on to the next one, which is the one with the plaid in the background. I like this one too. This one's very hard for me to decide what I like best. Love these flowers. I think that they are just fabulous with this, and so and using that big just because really makes it pop, but you could use any sentiment with this. That works extremely well. A little bit of the craft edge I think was a nice addition. But again, I hope you will let me know which one that you like. I showed this to several people to get their impressions, and everybody likes something a little bit different, and that's just perfect. And then this one is the all out, just blossoms everywhere with the sweet butterflies and a very feminine, sweet card that I really, really love. It kind of reminds me kind of an English garden with all these blossoms everywhere, and so I really, really like this one as well. I want to thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you will let me know which one that you like the best. Here's a recap of the things that I use: the blended petals, the plaid turnabout, but every supply that I use those distress inks, but everything that I use will be in a link down below. You can go and click that. It'll take you to not only a few more close-ups, but it will give you a complete supply list. And I do hope you try these out, because this is a great stamp set by Conquer the Ninth. And I will be with you again with another video very soon, and I hope to see you then. Bye.